Hello, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Scenes podcast for Out of Frame. I'm your host, Sean Malone, creative director of the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame. With me today, as always, is Paul Nelson, Out of Frame Shorts editor and Fee's social media manager. As you may have noticed today, we do not have Jen. Jen is probably hosting a moving truck right now, if her schedule worked out correctly. She's in Utah and hopefully getting her moving stuff delivered today, I would hope. So it's just us. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well. It's been a fun week. Our Discord, our Out of Frame Discord is going really well. If you guys haven't joined that, go ahead. It's open to everyone. I have probably ruined. I'm going to preemptively say that I might have ruined my marriage. Because of the Discord, I was pushed over the edge to try out and purchase Civilization 6, and I may or may not have been playing until the wee hours of the morning since I made that purchase. And every time I look at the clock, just one more turn. 30 minutes later, just one more turn.
That's the problem I have with video games, for sure. Video games are tough, man. Like I can't, I don't play them very much. I've talked about this, with people on YouTube before. I don't play video games a whole lot, in part because I will lose a weekend if I play a game. Like I will lose the entire weekend to that game, and most of the time, I just kind of can't afford the time, more or less. But there's also I'm not super passionate about it. I'd rather spend that time, doing other kind of creative projects, or, even just watching movies or something like that. It has generally more appeal to me, although I still want to finish Breath of the Wild, and I have not even started playing Witcher 3. And I'd kind of like to do that at some point. I haven't gotten there. I think if there was something like Civilization, it would just be a million hours gone.
Yeah, they definitely make it so you cannot get off. You just want to keep going. So whatever they're doing to develop that game, they're doing it right. And but it's a lot of fun. Yeah. So check it out.
Because they did Civilization, that was the one they did, they remastered all of the old ones and brought them back, right? Did they do that?
I believe they have those. So this is a new one. This was right. Well, newish, 3 years old, but this was not a remaster. This was a brand new game.
Nice. Well, cool. Yeah, I've I don't know. This weekend, I actually had some client work that I had to do, which is kind of rare for me anymore. I don't do a whole lot of freelance projects. Fee keeps me, as you know, pretty busy.
Yeah, not too much downtime.
A minor understatement, but I had something that I had started talking with a client about. I mean, months and months ago, that we're finally getting into. So I had to do a little bit of that. But then the other thing I did that I'm kind of proud of, because it's not really a normal thing for me, is I refinished a toolbox. We've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but over the break, I went up to my father-in-law's house and my parents-in-law's house, and we moved them down here. And in that, we got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, including just an immense amount of tools. Excuse me, but they had two chest height Craftsman toolboxes. One of them kind of wasn't really salvageable, so that I sold, got rid of in Maryland. But the other one we brought to our house, and still needed to be refinished and refurbished and stuff. So over the last couple of weeks, I sanded it all down, kind of tried to get as much of the rust and stuff like that out of it as I could, and re-sprayed the entire thing, painted the entire. So there's two levels of it or whatever, and a lot of work, but kind of enjoyable. And I don't do a whole lot of this kind of I don't know, sort of typically kind of manly kinds of projects. Like I do, like most of my work is all, it's all creative work. So it's like me sitting at a computer or at like a keyboard or, doing crafty kind of stuff or whatever, artwork, drawing, stuff like that, writing. But I don't do a whole lot of like get in there, grinding away steel with power tools. It's kind of fun. Enjoyed.
Nice little change of pace. Doing camera work and stuff like that. That's a lot of, I would call that manly. Yeah. Back when I did that a lot, it was lifting heavy things. Yeah.
But I don't know. I had a good time. It's sometimes it's really nice to like do something with your hands. And you're right. Like I think on-set production does give you a little bit of that. Like you end up building stuff or you end up running, electric lines or like sort of working on, the construction of various things like that. It's enjoyable to do sometimes. It's not exactly like I've always been more of an editor and more of a behind the scenes, like, writer, producer, editor kind of person. And even to the extent that I've done camera work over the years, it's never been my main focus, but definitely nice to, plus the weather was super nice this weekend. So it was perfect time to do it. I did have one hiccup in the entire process though. As I was already spraying everything, I didn't realize this was going to be scheduled for the day that I did this on Saturday. We had a crew come out and clean our gutters. And so like I had to very frantically move everything I was already in the process of spray painting into the middle of the yard, because once they got up on the roof, it was just leaves and like debris just like exploding off of the roof. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to move all of this out into the middle of the yard, because otherwise I was going to end up with, it was going to be a much craftier project with leaves and sticks, and it's going to be all this kind of stuff.
A camo tool chest.
Camo, very heavily textured tool chest. It's not going to be great, but I got it done, man. And then, as per the point of today's episode, I then sat down and finished watching the first 3 episodes of WandaVision, which is what we wanted to talk about today on the main part of the show. We will have a bonus section after we get done talking about WandaVision. We're going to continue on and talk about another movie that we've recently done an Out of Frame episode on, Ghostbusters. But we're going to reserve that for our Patreon/Subscribestar bonus section. So if you are a fan of the show and you want to support us and you want to get bonus content for the podcast, go to patreon.com/outofframeshow or subscribestar.com/outofframeshow. Subscribe, you'll get access to bonus podcasts, plus you'll get access to the private side of our Discord server. It's a really good group, and if you like the show and if you support what we're doing, please definitely check that out. But Paul,
and if you want to see pictures of Sean's tool chest, become a patron.
Also true. Yeah. And also for those who are just now tuning in and notice that I've had a cough for weeks. My whole house has been dealing with COVID, and it's been a whole thing. We're all fine, but I do have a never-ending, mild, relatively aggravating cough. So I apologize. But Paul, let's talk about WandaVision. Did you get into it? Yeah.
Yes.
What's your initial impressions?
When this first was announced, I was like, whatever. I'll probably watch this once it's released, but I don't care about these characters really at all. Their stories in the movies were just kind of flat. So having said all that, COVID hit and there hasn't been any MCU content since 18, 20 months. So now I was itching for some. So when this hit, I was like, perfect timing. It dove into it, and it's just a great show. I've really been enjoying it. It's surpassed my expectations. It's almost done the impossible, which is making me care about these 2 superheroes, which before whatever. Yeah. Just give me more Captain America and Iron Man. That's all I care about. But I think the the idea is interesting, and the mystery is good enough. I think I already have it figured out, but it's good enough, and the way they are handling the looks of the different episodes, it all comes together to make a very enjoyable show.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think I have figured out the mystery. I haven't given a ton of thought to it, but I also, like, because I am a big comics fan, although I will say, like, these characters are a little bit outside of the ones that I normally pay attention to. Also, I do like both of them. In particular, actually, like, I would say, generally speaking, Wanda, Scarlet Witch, and Vision are not two characters that I particularly care about. But I will actually say, because of Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen, I have liked them and cared about them a lot more because of the MCU than I ever cared about them in their treatment in the comics, oddly enough. And there is a lot of history with them in the comics, and a lot of Wanda and Vision stories that have existed for a lot of years. But let's step back a second, though, and say, like, the show is super interesting because we're only 3 episodes in. So Paul and I are only on episode 3. We may come back at a later episode and revisit this conversation later. But they're doing something super interesting with the aesthetic of it, which is like, this is all, we kind of get the sense that it's like all in Wanda's mind, or maybe in Wanda and Vision are together in some kind of alternate reality kind of thing. But they inhabit classic TV show tropes going really all the way back kind of to the 50s, maybe. And so, like, the first episode is really like a Bewitched or like an I Love Lucy kind of take. And then the second episode is a little bit more, I forget what the second episode, like the reference that we were kind of going for with that, but Leave It to Beaver, kind of like neighborhood sitcom kind of thing. And then this third episode was a little bit more kind of, I don't know, Brady Bunch maybe might be the best reference to give. But we're kind of like shifting through the decades of American popular television, and they're really doing it, by the way. Like, it really, really looks and feels like those shows, like the way that they're written, the way that the dialogue is constructed, and all of the production design, and even the way that they're edited and shot. Because, like, they're doing, so the first was like 4:3, and it's all black and white. And it was probably, I don't know, Paul, I get the sense that it was either shot on film or it was just a very good digital process that made it feel like, 50s television. It's felt that way to me for these 3 episodes. And then, at the end of the second episode, Wanda realized something, and the world turned to color, and it became kind of like, a full color Technicolor TV show. Then we kind of get into the 70s and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really curious to see how they're going to continue that theme. I imagine they're going to get into the 80s and 90s before we kind of catch up to reality. But I don't know, the cracks are starting to show also. So, Paul, how do you feel about the mystery?
Something is afoot. I don't know how heavy we want to get into spoilers, but if we don't care, I can give you
my.
I
mean, let's get into before we say spoilers. Here's what I'll say. I find it super interesting. I think if you're a Marvel fan, I don't think Paul and I can spoil anything too major yet, because they haven't revealed a whole lot yet. But I would say check it out if you're an MCU fan. I think you're gonna really like this. It's really interesting the way that they're doing it, and I think, who knows, it could be a train wreck by the end, right? But so far, I think you're headed in a pretty interesting direction. So I'd like to see where they go.
Yeah. So my initial theory based off the first 3 episodes is that Wanda is obviously creating this universe, this alternate reality, and there is a nefarious force that is making her do it, or has put her in this position where she is doing it. And Geraldine's character, who is what was her name? She was the
I
daughter of.
Yeah, I didn't realize this until I looked at IMDb. I don't know why, because the show hasn't really revealed it yet. But IMDb has Geraldine's character. It's a woman named Tanoa Paris, plays Geraldine, who's like one of their neighbors. But in IMDb, she's listed as Monica Rambeau, who, for those who aren't big comic fans, Monica Rambeau was the little girl in Captain Marvel. She was the daughter of Captain Marvel's friend on Earth. But in the comics, she's actually she basically gains Captain Marvel's powers under the names Photon and Pulsar and a couple other superhero characters. She actually has superpowers. I don't know if this version of Monica Rambeau has them yet. I'm not really sure, but she's a pretty major character that they, like, IMDb kind of spoiled, but I don't think the show is really like revealed yet. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so it's very clear that like Monica Rambeau is not part of, like, she's a real person not being generated by Scarlet Witch. Also, by the way, I want to step back for another second because I realized I was watching the show yesterday with my wife and my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law has absolutely no context for any of these characters. And then I realized that I had to try to explain Vision and Wanda and like explain what they can do, and it's really, really hard to explain. So
literally
those pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like Scarlet Witch in the comics is really described as having reality warping powers. And it's pretty broad. Like, she can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's not just limited to like, telekinesis or like being able to move stuff around or whatever. Like, she can literally change, and it happens in the show a lot. She'll like, materialize things out of thin air. She'll teleport something from one place to another. She'll like, there's all kinds of stuff that she is capable of doing. And it's pretty powerful. Meanwhile, Vision is an android, in the MCU anyway, powered by one of the Infinity Stones, and he's got all sorts of powers too. I mean, he can fly, he can phase shift, he can go through walls, he can change his density. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff he can do too. So they're both pretty weird, interesting characters. But yeah, then when I watched this with my mother-in-law, she was not sure what was happening. Like, also Wanda gets pregnant in the third episode, and we're like trying to figure out, how that happened or whatever, but it's just all, yeah, it's a whole thing. But anyway, so Monica Rambeau I believe, and I think, Paul, this is where you're going with this anyway, is like, she is not a construct of Wanda's imagination. So I don't know where we're going with that, though. Do you think she's S.H.I.E.L.D.? Do you think she's something else?
There was clues that there's another organization called SWORD that she is a part of. And it seems like she was trying to pull her out of this alternate reality. She was trying to get her to remember and confront her past with Ultron and her brother. And right. I don't. So Wanda's obviously controlling everything, but I also don't think everyone that we see on screen, I think all of them are real people. And yeah. This is what obviously we don't know yet is Vision died. We saw it twice. He died twice.
Right. Yeah.
Is he the only one that's not back or not real? Because it seems like everyone else is controlled by her to some extent or another. With like the first episode with the dinner table where she chokes the guy. So
I do have another question though, which is that like, when does this take place? Right. Because, and I'll offer this as a possibility. There is an a canonically unaccounted for period with Wanda and Vision. So in Avengers Infinity War, there's the reintroduction of Wanda and Vision starts with them being off the grid for several months, right? Like there's a long period where the Avengers, now kind of run by Captain America, does not know where they are. I mean, deliberately, they're not tracking them, like they're not trying to find them, but like they don't know where they are for a several month period. And then they're reintroduced when I don't remember which, it's like Ebony Maw or somebody like from Thanos's like henchmen or whatever come down and attack them. And so like, that's a question for me, is like, I don't know when this story is taking place. Could it be taking place before Vision, was killed by Thanos? That I'm not really sure. But I think you're right, though, in that Monica Rambeau does seem to be a member of SWORD, which is the sort of related entity to S.H.I.E.L.D. And, I guess we could talk about that a little bit. I mean, like it's kind of interesting. I rewatched Age of Ultron after I finished watching WandaVision, and by the way, I'm like, I actually like Age of Ultron a lot better than most people do. It's a whole other conversation to have. But one of the things that happens in Age of Ultron is that S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up at the end with helicarriers and like transport ships to get all of the people from Sokovia off the flying rock that their city has become. And Captain America, then Wanda's brother Pietro, Quicksilver, says, "Hey, this is S.H.I.E.L.D.?" Basically he's under the impression that S.H.I.E.L.D. is evil the entire movie until like S.H.I.E.L.D. comes up to save them. And he goes, "Oh, it's this S.H.I.E.L.D." And Steve says, "This is what S.H.I.E.L.D. is supposed to be," right? SWORD is the opposite, right? SWORD is what S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually, which is like a clandestine, CIA type organization that goes out and causes, I want to say causes destruction, but like they're the militaristic end of things, whereas S.H.I.E.L.D. is meant to be the intelligence gathering and defensive aspect of things, thus S.H.I.E.L.D., right? But I don't know. I think that's all kind of interesting because the MCU has never introduced SWORD as an entity until now. So I'm kind of curious about that.
There's a lot of unanswered questions which will be answered, I'm sure. But I think what I also really appreciate about the show is that it is legitimately funny. There's a lot of moments that are just great, and what they do with each time period, with the 50s up to the 60s and 70s, they really nail it. Like in the 50s, they actually used the same way they made things float on TV in the 50s is how they made it float in the show. So
and it's super clear. It looks exactly as a episode of Bewitched. It looks like just like that, which is pretty cool, honestly. Like to go back and really put the time in to make that, to make those things work has been pretty fun to watch. And I think, to the point that we kind of mentioned earlier, like I imagine they're going to go into the 80s and 90s, but what sitcoms do you think they're going to reference from those eras, or will they be sitcoms? Will we get into like NYPD Blue or will it be, something else?
I kind of assume it will be sitcoms. I hope they stick with the kind of the sitcom formula because it is just so funny, and they knock the tropes out of the park. So if they did 3 more episodes, the 80s, 90s, they did a 2000s where it was in Office style, I would lose it just to see Paul Bettany do a fourth wall break like Jim Halpert. Man, that needs to happen.
Dude, that would be pretty ridiculous. I just feel like I'm thinking about like sitcoms in the early 80s. I mean, I guess I'd be thinking about stuff like, I don't know, Golden Girls or like is Three's Company still in the 70s or is that in the 80s? I don't remember.
I think so. I am not very familiar with 80s sitcoms. There's just so many.
Because you don't really I don't think about the early 80s. I mean, all that stuff had sitcoms and I don't really think about it a whole lot. but I don't really think about any of it until you get into the late 80s with stuff like The Cosby Show, and then
Cheers.
But Cheers, right? Yeah, and then Cheers is an interesting one too, because I think that like WandaVision so far has really relied on family sitcoms, like neighborhood sitcoms. It's been very like husband and wife move into a neighborhood, and these are their sort of goofy travails with, a neighbor who's trimming the hedges, or, there's a potluck that they got to go to, or, whatever, like those kinds of things. And then sitcoms change a lot. I mean, it gets into like office-based stuff, or into, everybody hanging out at a bar, or, friends with like everybody hanging out at a coffee shop or whatever. And it's kind of, it's going to change a bit, but they also became more ensemble focused too, which, you don't really have in this case. So I'm not really sure where they're going to go with that. But also, excuse me, we're already at a point where like Wanda and Vision are very much like aware that they're in a kind of a weird situation. Because at first, like the first episode, they're just living their life as this sitcom couple. But by now they're like, oh man, something insane is happening, and we need to look into it. So I think the mysteries obviously does. I think Vision does too, but I'm also like, I'm kind of with you on like, I don't know if Vision is being created by Wanda, or if it's actually Vision. We're gonna find out. But I think that's predicated on the time, like if this is set in that period before he dies, then maybe it's fine. But like, otherwise, yeah, it's like Wanda's kind of cracked up because she lost him.
Had to kill him.
And I had to kill him. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it's insane. I mean,
dark stuff.
It is really dark stuff. It's you don't think of the MCU as being that dark, really, but there are a lot of really difficult choices that people have to make. And I think it's something that I want to get into in the Patreon bonus section a little bit, because we want to talk about the institution of politics into movies, or not just politics, but because I typically think of politics as being like kind of news, current events driven kind of stuff. Like I think of politics largely as being, what this person said or that person said, or like, Trump or Biden, or like really talking about political figures and the day-to-day goings on of Congress and stuff like that. But there is the bringing in ideas and ideology and philosophy into storytelling. And that, frankly, is something that everybody should be doing. And I really think generally everybody should be doing in good stories anyway. But like the MCU has done a lot of it. And I don't know that they ever really will get a whole lot of credit for it. But I mean, even going back to, and I've done Out of Frame episodes on all this stuff, but heck, even going back all the way to Iron Man 1, I mean, Iron Man gets into the issue of government contracts and, arms manufacturing. Right. And it's a huge piece of that story is like Tony was an arms manufacturer. Stark Industries is an arms manufacturer that doesn't actually have any control over where those arms go, and it kind of shows it as his company is selling arms to terrorists, or, through Obadiah Stane, through Jeff Bridges' character. But, in general, in the real world, the U.S. military will sell arms to people on the other side of the world that end up in the hands of terrorists as well. Pretty interesting, deep subjects to cover, but with the MCU, they're always just sort of background. Like they're always just like part of the story. And I think even once you get into stuff like Infinity War and Endgame, there are some really interesting, pretty heavy ideas really baked into some of those stories that that are really still on the sub level of all of the storytelling, because all of the majority of it is superheroes running around like having big fights and stuff. So I don't know. I'm pretty interested in all that kind of stuff, and I really like seeing them, work some depth into some of these things. And in this case, I mean, you're right. It's a pretty dark situation to have to make that choice to, basically kill somebody that you love in order to prevent the destruction of the world. It's a heavy, heavy story to tell.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's what I really do appreciate about the MCU is that it gives us these topics to talk about. And I wasn't around for the beginning of the series, but I'm sure a lot of the early stuff was about Thanos and that you did Without a Frame. So, hopefully they keep going down this route because it gives us a lot to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is right. So I rewatched Age of Ultron. And again, I feel differently, I think, than most people about Age of Ultron. Like, I get that there's like some elements of it that don't quite land, and there's some things that people don't like about it for various reasons. But and there's a lot of, like, Age of Ultron suffers a little bit from being a movie that's a little bit bloated with ads for future movies in the MCU. And it's a narrative problem for Age of Ultron. It's like there's a lot of things that are like purely set up for the next, for Captain America Civil War or for, Endgame or all these other movies coming down the line. And that's a problem. But on the other hand, there's actually a ton of really good stuff in that movie. And there's stuff that I kind of want to do an Out of Frame episode on, because it's a lot about, like, it's stuff that we've talked about in Out of Frame a million times, like sort of the central planner mindset of that Tony has, where he thinks that he can predict and plan and control not national security, but literally global security just by himself. Like, he doesn't need anyone else. He can just literally create a robot that becomes a protector of the entire world. And of course, this has disastrous unintended consequences, because Tony doesn't know everything, but he's too arrogant to not realize that he doesn't know everything. And he doesn't know how what he does is actually going to affect the world, but he does it anyway because he thinks he has the moral right to make those kinds of decisions, which is interesting because, like, as a superhero, you're kind of asserting that right anyway, except if you're asserting it for yourself to say, I will take me and my body and go stand in the way of this threat. That's a very different thing than saying, I will create like an Ultron who will essentially become the enforcer of the entire planet's security needs. These are really different ideas. And, like, Tony doesn't really see a distinction between the two of them, and I think that's a pretty interesting conversation to have, especially in the context of Out of Frame. And honestly, at this point, I really, really, really like to be talking about stuff on Out of Frame that was more fun to talk about, which is like movies and TV shows and stuff like that. Because I feel like I've done nothing but talk about, like, this horrible state of the world from coronavirus, or from, the episode that I'm working on right now is on social media censorship. I mean, this is like heavy issues that don't have a fun superhero battle at the end to, like, make them enjoyable. So I would like to get away from that at some point in the near future.
Little Godzilla versus Kong.
So I haven't even watched that trailer yet. Did you watch the trailer?
It's nuts. It's everything I want in a movie, and I can't wait for it.
Well,
so right. I do have a ranking.
You have a ranking of sitcoms?
My favorite sitcoms post Seinfeld, because Seinfeld is by far and away the best sitcom of all time, and changed the way
fighting words television. For so many.
It might be fighting words for some people, but they might be fighting words, but they're wrong. It's wrong. Seinfeld changed the game, and that's that. But anyways, so my top 5, and after this first one, please stay with me, because I know this number 5 is going to be controversial. But the 5th best sitcom since Seinfeld is The Big Bang Theory.
Ooh.
4. Yes. Yeah. Put the pitchforks
right away.
down. Hear me out. Hear me out. It was the biggest sitcom of all time as far as viewership, or one of the biggest sitcoms of all time as far as viewership.
Undeniably a popular sitcom. Undeniably. But yeah. All right.
Number 4. It's number 4. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Every episode. Just absolutely hilarious. Number 3, Arrested Development. Another classic. Number Strong. 2, 30 Rock.
Do we count that as a sitcom? I guess.
I would say so.
I guess. I mean, I guess. I don't know because it gets into a territory, and you're probably going to mention The Office also, but like, it gets into this territory for me that's like, it's not a when I think of sitcom, I think of what BoJack Horseman is making fun of, right? I think of Family Matters. I think of like Full House, stuff like that. Like that's my concept of sitcom.
Well, that's why you can't, like, after Seinfeld, sitcoms are just so different, because Seinfeld basically made fun of everything and killed it.
Yeah.
And speaking of Seinfeld, the best sitcom post Seinfeld is Curb Your Enthusiasm. And it's no coincidence that the creator of both are the same. So Curb takes the top spot. I know there's a lot of like Malcolm in the Middle, The Office, The Good Place, Community. Gosh, get out of here.
People. Hey, look, if you're going to talk about Big Bang Theory, we should probably talk about How I Met Your Mother. I mean, I feel like that's all.
Oh.
Oh man. Malcolm in the Middle too. Like I kind of forgotten about that, but that is absolutely, like, Malcolm in the Middle fits into like what would be my like really straight down the middle definition of sitcom. Like it really is like a family, like a suburban family, because the sitcom is kind of an interesting, like, it's an interesting thing that only exists because the suburban middle class family exists, right? Like it's really how the entire thing has been. And granted, there are some things that I think qualify as sitcoms. Some of the Norman Lear stuff, like All in the Family, whatever, or Good Times, whatever, stuff like that like breaks the mold a little bit, in that it's about a lower class family, or it's about like people who aren't this kind of upper middle class, kind of like living that kind of lifestyle, the kind of Leave It to Beaver, Mayberry kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think the vast majority, I mean, even when you get into Family Matters or, The Cosby Show, or, like Family Ties, like all of these kinds of things are all very much predicated on a two-parent, relatively well-off family living in suburbia. So, like, nobody's like inner city. Nobody is like super poor. Like, it's not about any of that. It's really about like these kinds of like first world problems that people have, that they can only have when they've gotten enough wealth, that, the questions of like, where's my food coming from, give way to like, did I make too many turkeys, or did I burn the turkey and I need to make a new turkey or something like that because the boss is coming over in 15 minutes or something, which is kind of the thing that happens on WandaVision, is like they have an anniversary date marked. I mean, this is such a classic like 60s sitcom kind of trope anyway, but it's like they've got a date marked on a calendar. Neither of them can remember, but because they both think it's a romantic anniversary, and they both don't want to, like, they don't want to be embarrassed by not remembering the romantic anniversary. They both keep like tiptoeing around the idea of what it is, and like sort of insinuating that they know what it is. Turns out it's Vision's boss is coming over for dinner, and they need to make dinner, for the boss. And that's just, it's such a classic oh, got to impress the boss to get the big promotion kind of thing that you would see on, Love Boat or whatever, like any of those kinds of shows. Maybe not Love Boat. It's probably bad example, but you know what I mean? Like again, I Love Lucy or, Brady Bunch or Partridge Family or whatever, right? It's all that very, very classic tropes, but it's entirely predicated on, like a middle class existence that didn't exist prior to the 50s, like not in that sense. So I don't know. I think it's pretty interesting. They're kind of going that direction and kind of pulling their way through some of these tropes. And I think it's gonna get weirder before it gets less weird. I don't know. Maybe will get less weird, but I'm looking forward to it, man. I want to see the rest of this, and I want to see where they head, where they take the show.
And not only that, Disney again doing the weekly release schedule. I just love it. This show is perfect for the deep dives on the YouTube videos of like 63 Easter eggs you missed. So I've watched a few of those already. So, but this is what this brings about. You're not like, oh, which episode are you on? At the digital water cooler. Water coolers no longer exist.
I kind of disagreed with you when you first brought up that point, but I'm starting to come around to it a little bit. I kind of like reverting to the old system. The other thing I got to say too is, like, this is a total tangent in a way. My wife and I finally we just finished basically binge watching the last season of Vikings, and we'd watched all of Vikings before, and I don't know. I kind of like having stuff that like there's a thing that I'm starting to miss a little bit with doing so many like full show binge watches or full season binge watches, is that you kind of miss the variety where you're kind of bouncing back and forth between different things. And then of course you really miss there's no point of a cliffhanger, right? And that was kind of what we were getting with Vikings, is like every episode theoretically has some sort of a cliffhanger that you would do as a standard way to end a TV show, an episode of a TV series. But then we just go right on into the next episode. So it's not really much of a delay. There's no delayed gratification. It's just like, okay, well, we're just going to bounce, from, oh, hey, they're in a battle and it looked like this guy got stabbed. Like, will he survive? Oh, next episode, zip right into it and figure it out. There's no mystery that way. But with WandaVision, like, we've been forced into a situation where the mystery actually has some, like, it's forced delayed gratification, because like they just left in, sorry, this is the biggest spoiler really, is the end of the third episode of WandaVision. Monica Rambeau, or Geraldine, gets booted out of the reality that Wanda's in and like lands in, essentially the real world. Right? That's a huge cliffhanger. That's an enormous mystery. That's like, oh, wow. Okay. There is a hard split between this Wanda reality that's happening, that not only is happening, but that they've like built a perimeter around. Like they're, either the perimeter is like they created Wanda's reality, or they're trying to contain Wanda's reality. It's, who knows at this point, but that's a big mystery that we're going to have to solve. And we got to wait a week, right?
Got to wait a week. Now we'll talk about it, and it'll take up a little bit more space in my brain for the next month. Yeah.
Well, I'm digging it. Well, all right, man. Let's wrap up our discussion of WandaVision here. I think I think, as everybody can tell, I'm pretty into it. I'm interested in seeing where it goes, and I love the direction they've taken it. I love how bizarre it is, which I think is perfectly appropriate for this character and for the set of characters and the powers and everything else. So I'm really pretty excited about seeing what happens with it.
Yeah, same here. You got plenty of time. It's, to catch up before the season ends. So, and join the conversation with us over on Discord. I would love to get everyone's thoughts about the Big Bang Theory being one of the best sitcoms of all time. I definitely want all of that. So please come join that convo.
Yeah. Join the Discord. Go to the let's do this in the television chat room we've built up there, so you can talk about your favorite sitcoms. By the way, Paul, I agree with you. I mean, there's some in there. Curb is pretty high up there. I don't know if I'd put Curb as number one, because I find it hard to watch Curb like more than one episode at a time for like a week, basically. Like I can't even binge Curb. Like it's impossible. But I can with stuff like 30 Rock. I mean, like it's fantastic.
I think Larry David would take that as a compliment.
I mean, how could he not, really? Like, he's created the most like uncomfortable, cringeworthy show that's ever been made. It's impossible to be comfortable while watching Larry David on that show. You literally can't. But all right. Well, thank you everybody for sticking around, listening to us talk about WandaVision. As I said at the beginning, if you are a fan of the show, definitely check us out on YouTube. Of course, Out of Frame on YouTube. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. You can watch the show, or you can subscribe on Spotify, Google Play, or Google Podcast, Apple, everything. Anywhere where you want to get your podcasts, like you can hear the show. I think we set up a link tree as well, to make it a little bit easier for people to find the podcast, the show, everything that we do. So check us out on basically every social platform you can think of, and we're expanding, by the way, because we need to, given the situation with Facebook and Twitter and everything else. So, yeah, and if you're really a huge fan, if you love what we do, consider supporting us on Patreon or Subscribestar. We'd love to have you, and then you get bonus content like we're just about to go into. So, for our patrons and subscribers, stick around. We're going to get into Ghostbusters in just a minute. But for everybody else, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.